great once said, you don't remember what people say. You don't always remember what people do, but you remember how people make you feel. And so tonight, I hope you remember that we are trying to make you feel that you are empowered, to make you feel that you are important, to make you feel that you have value. And if we stand together, if we link and latch ourselves together and get out the vote, we can change this world. Thank you. And I have a first edition copy of this book for Carrie Charles and for Yolanda Harris. Care Bear, I'm sorry. She told me to say that. And then, John, we want to bestow this book to you.
Thank you.
Is Phil? Where's Phil? And Phil, we have a book for you. And Benita Wright Smith, we have a book for you. Thank you. And just in case you didn't know, I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Right now, I would like to thank City Auditor Mike Stenziano for recognizing our award recipients. And I would like to have Tracy Johnson, Chairperson, MIP Committee, to come up. She will introduce our speaker this evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy L. Johnson, and I am a 14-year high school teacher with Columbus City. It is an honor to introduce Roland S. Martin, a journalist, author, and communicator whose voice has become one of the most trusted in American media. Martin is a graduate of Jackie Yates High School, Magnet School of Communications, and a graduate of Texas A&M University, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in journalism. Later, he received a master's degree in Christian communications from Louisiana Baptist University. His dedication to excellence has since been recognized with honorary degrees from numerous colleges and universities. Martin is the host and managing editor of #Roland Martin Unfiltered, the first daily online show in history focused on news and analysis of politics, entertainment, sports, and culture from an explicitly African-American perspective. He has launched the Black Star Network, which features a variety of shows focused on news, culture, finance, wellness, and history. And let's not forget his 4 books that challenge us to think deeply about race and society. In his career, Martin has been awarded with more than 40 awards for journalistic excellence. In 2008, he was awarded the President's Award, and in 2013, he was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists. He is a 4-time NAACP Image Award winner. His career spans newspapers, magazines, podcasts, and broadcast media, reflecting both his versatility and his commitment to telling the stories that matter. He is a life member of the National Association of Black Journalists and a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He is also a member of Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. He is a board member of the Education Reform Group, 50 CAN, and he is married to Reverend Jackie Hood Martin. Being given the moniker of the voice of Black America, he remains ready to provide us the important news of the world that affects Blacks and African Americans. He is more than a voice, but a steady presence to remind us of the truth, and that courage and perspective will help us reach a better future. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Roland S. Martin.
All right, appreciate it. How we doing? Good. Glad to see you. This is not the first time I have been in Columbus. Not the first time I've actually addressed this dinner as well. So I've spent a lot of time here, so I appreciate the invitation to come back to chat with you on today, which would have been Dr. King's 97th birthday. It is always great to speak with regards to this weekend, this federal holiday, which takes place on Monday. It's always great because he also, of course, was a good Alpha brother. So it's always great to recognize not only what he did, but more importantly, especially if you look at when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, the one a two-time impeached, convicted felon in chief will never get. When he accepted that award, he accepted it on behalf of the entire movement because it wasn't just about him. And in fact, when the prize, the financial prize that came with it, his wife didn't like it, but he gave all the money away to distribute among the movement. She was like, look, we need some stuff at the house. But he understood how important that was. And we're talking about media. And oftentimes when we talk about this federal holiday, too often in this country, we often, not just in this country, but even in our community, we forget Coretta Scott King. The reality is, if you look at how it has been positioned and portrayed, she was just his wife. But the reality is, if you actually do any substantial reading on Dr. King, you will realize that a number of the positions that he took actually were at the insistence of her. In fact, when I interviewed Zanona Clayton, she talked about how Coretta Scott King traveled the country and would sing on behalf of the movement, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for the movement as well. We talk about Dr. King's position when it came to the Vietnam War, when he gave his speech Beyond Vietnam at Riverside Church in New York City. But it wasn't so the person who really was driving his change when it came to the Vietnam War, it was Coretta Scott King, as opposed to somehow he just sort of changed himself. And so those things are important because when I interviewed Andrew Young, he said, with too many people, he said, folks talk about me, they talk about all of the other leaders, he said, but actually it was our wives who made us do what we do. He said it really wasn't our choice, he said, because they would have kicked our behinds if we didn't do it. And that's important because when one of the greatest mistakes that we continue to make when we talk about this day and this weekend is that we make it about him and not about the people. We make it about him and not the movement. You cannot have a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and leading the Montgomery Improvement Association, the bus boycott in Montgomery, if there is not a Joanne Robinson, who was the one who actually organized the boycott. Now, I know there are folk in this room, and I really don't understand why the AK's over here not clapping, because that was Joe Sarah who was doing it. And I'm saying that because far too often in this country, when we talk about American history and we talk about his story, it's often talked about from the perspective of white historians leaving out African Americans. But we also have a history in this country, even when we talk about American history and black history, where it is his story and you leave out the number of women in the role that they played. I bring up Joanne Robinson because it was only mere days after the Brown vs. Board of Education decision when she sent that letter to the bus company saying we need to desegregate. Why is that important? Because we just lost Claudette Colvin, who passed away at the age of 86, or should be funeralized on January 24th. And there were so many others who actually were accosted on buses, including Joanne Robinson and Miss Colvin. And then when when Rosa Parks was arrested, then they said, let's spring into action. And so all of those folks played a role. And so when we talk about this day and this holiday, I really believe we've got to transition away from solely focusing on him and actually focus on the broader movement, because if you do not have a Fred Shuttlesworth, if you do not have a Septima Clark, if you do not have a Diane Ash, if you do not have a Fannie Lou Hamer, if you don't have Bob Moses, if you don't have Annie Lee Cooper, if you don't have any of those people, literally there is no Dr. King. There is no national holiday. And so that's how I believe we also must begin to broaden our perspective when it comes to this particular day. And the reason I initially brought her up, because you celebrating folks in media up here, and many folk don't realize that when we think about the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize for photography, Monetta Sleet, and we all remember that famous photograph of Bernice King laying on the lap of Coretta Scott King at the funeral of Dr. King. Well, folk don't know how he got the photo. And if you want to understand institutionalized racism and how it impacts so much, that was a racist, Jim Crow, whites-only press pool that was set up to cover Dr. King's funeral. Okay, let me repeat that. So the funeral of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who broke down barriers, that was an all-white press pool that was set up to cover his funeral. They would not allow any black-owned media or any black journalists in the press pool. So Lerone Bennett, Ebony Magazine, and Simeon Booker, Jet Magazine, went to Coretta Scott King, and they told her, they said, Mrs. King, they're not allowing Ebony and Jet in the press pool. And she said, well, let those white folks know that if Ebony and Jet are not in the press pool, there will be no press pool at the funeral. Now, so that particular photo, he shoots that photo only because she insisted that they be in the press pool. Now, why is that important? Because there are folks in this room right now who don't have that level of courage, and you don't necessarily have black-owned media showing up covering your events, and it might be a school board or city council or other event. And so here was somebody who was conscious of that, and so she made it clear that if you want to participate in what I'm doing, then you're going to have to broaden your doors. And so the same sort of courage has to take place for so many of us today, and unfortunately, here we are in 2026, we still are dealing with that. We're living in an age in this country where $350 billion is being spent every single year on advertising, and black-owned media is getting 0.5 to 1% of that money. I guarantee you there are corporations in this city that have significant black market share, but they're spending virtually little dollars with black-owned media, but they love for black folks to buy their products. What I'm saying is the only way those things are going to change if folk today stop being comfortable in our present capacity and be willing to challenge power if we're going to see things change. And so that's also what a Coretta Scott King did and a Dr. King did. That ain't the subject of my speech, but just understand you now about to realize how this is about to go. So let me position it this way. I want you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to look them, and I want you to say to them, rest time is over. Now look to your other side, and I need you to look to them. I need you to say, rest time is over. Okay, so now I want you to look to the table behind you or the table across from you, and I want you to say, hey, rest time is over. Two days, 48 hours after the November election, I was talking about the racists, and I was talking about the campaigns taking place in 2025. Oh, by the way, while we're doing this here, so they were like, be sure to show us some love. And I said, first of all, I did my show from here, but also I said, we're live streaming the speech. And I told them, I said, this would happen when you own your own shit. So if they not here, tell them just go to my Black Star Network or YouTube channel, they can actually see it and see we don't ask permission. We just do what we do because I own it 100%. So I don't have a boss. 48 hours after the election, I was talking about the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in April 2025. And I had people who were watching my show, and they were hitting me up. They were like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" They said, "We just had an election, and we're upset, and we're mad, and we're sad." And I said, "I understand that." I said, "But she lost." And they were like, but I don't understand how can you just move on so easily?" I said, first of all, I'm not moving on easily, but the reality is we have to keep moving. And this thing, we went to January, and then you had the inauguration, and folk were like, I'm not understanding, and they were just like, I don't get it. And then I began to see all these stories about so many folk. A lot of sisters were saying, we're tired. We need to rest. And folk were talking about boots on the ground. They wanted to get away, and they wanted to dance, and they wanted to do all those different things. And I said, I understand that. And we were doing the show, and I had a young sister. She was 28, and she was like, "Roland, you don't understand. We are tired." And I was trying to be as diplomatic as possible. I was trying to be as compassionate as possible. But I ain't got a lot of compassion in me. I understand. I can be, I can soothe you, pray. That ain't really what I do. You can call my wife. She's a minister. She's a preacher. She can pray with you. She can, all that stuff. That ain't what I do. I often said that the Lord put on the earth, to give people comfort. There's no doubt God put me here to provide discomfort. So I was trying to hold it in. I was trying my best not to go there, but it just came out. I said, y'all are killing me with this bullshit of how tired you are. I said, how the hell are you 28 and tired? And I began to say the same thing to folk who are in their 30s and their 40s. I said, listen, my parents turned 78 last year. They have worked campaigns. They've been poll workers, precinct judges. They've run campaigns and phone banks. I said, they have committed. They were co-founders of a civic club. They have been highly engaged. I said, they can be tired. I said, but I don't understand how anybody who is 55 and under, actually I pushed it to 60. I said, I don't understand how anybody can say, oh my God, I'm tired. We've been having to carry this burden, and it's just too much, and America's let us down. So we just need to rest. I said, hell no, I can't listen to that. I said, I can't listen to that. I said, because the problem that I am seeing is that our community, this nation was held together in the wake and after the Civil Rights Movement, where you had this generation of people. The people who went to city council meetings and school board meetings and to the state house and went to Congress and who fought for laws and who fought for things. And they were the ones who informed us of upcoming elections and how we should vote and how we should focus on what we should be doing. These are the folks who were doing that. And I said, and now those folks are retiring and they're passing away. And part of our problem is that we have a gap right now because those folks have not been replaced in many of our communities. I said, you cannot replicate what those folks did based upon social media. Social media is a communication tool. It is not an organizing and mobilizing tool. And I made the point, I said, there are too many folk who are saying this, who have made withdrawals from the Black Bank of Justice, and they made no deposits. And I dare say, where we're sitting here right now, there are folks sitting in this room, you actually fit exactly what I'm talking about. That we have made withdrawals from the Bank of Justice, the folk who did all the work, and we are living on what they did. We are praising what they did. We are looking at the things that they were able to get done to change this city and this state and this country. But you now have to ask the question, what will they say about this generation at this dinner 30 years from today? So you got to ask yourself the question. See, it's cute being here. It's great. Maybe this is your black check-off event, where we come to the MLK event, take pictures, eat a chicken dinner, and then have a good time, post the photos on social media, and say we were here. But the real question is, what are you doing when you leave here to actually do the work that King and others did to actually change the city for good? See, you got to ask yourself the question, okay, you're sitting here at the MLK dinner, the Columbus Education Association, but I got to ask some folk in this room, how are you challenging city leaders right now to change the education dynamics as to how you're going to pay for education in Columbus? Now you're going to have to ask some businesses in Columbus, would you prefer to educate kids in the city or get more tax abatements to lower your costs as opposed to invest in kids? You're going to have to ask some city council members, are you willing to put on some real political courage and stand up to big business and say, you cannot have successful businesses if you have an uneducated populace? Somebody got to be willing to say, if you're a school board member, are you willing to challenge folk who are making those decisions, or are you going to go along to get along? You cannot say you are for the education of kids if you cannot finance it, if you cannot fund it. We are living in a world today where we keep saying how education is the most important thing, but it's not based upon how our actions look. But see, you ain't got to clap on that. But see, that's fine. I'm good. I got 5 million followers. They can clap for me. See, here we are in 2026, acting as if the past has no impact on the present. One of the reasons you have an education crisis in this city is because of racism. It's because of discrimination. It's because of white flight. Because you had white Americans who did not want black folks having power. And so what took place in the 70s and 80s is still impacting us in 2026. It is no different than the decisions made in the 1980s, in the 1960s, in the 1940s, in the early 1900s, and the 1800s. It's still impacting us today. When you have decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C., in state capitals, in city government, and county government, and school boards and others that impact us. In Virginia, praise God right now that you have my frat brother, Don Scott, who is the Speaker of the House in Virginia, and who is my Alfred brother, and you got that bad Delta Louise Lucas, who's rolling the money in the Senate. You now have a Democratic governor in Virginia, and they are going to pass for the second consecutive year and put it on the ballot to finally get rid of felony disenfranchisement in Virginia. That law was in place because in the early 1900s, a racist legislator literally said, we are passing this law to keep the niggas from voting. And for more than 100 years, people who had felonies were not allowed to vote, and the only way they could get restored is the governor individually signed every single one. So here we are in the 21st century, still being governed by Jim Crow laws. I'm sitting here watching folk having conversations nationally talking about housing and things along those lines. I did a podcast with Patrick Bet-David, who had the nerve to tell me, why isn't I won't move back to the community where I grew up. I'm like, you ain't even from here. I said, why don't you go back to the country where you came from? And so I had to tell him that, but you don't tell me to go back to somewhere if you don't go back to somewhere yourself. And so we were sitting here having a conversation, and he was telling me he was like, well, I don't understand black folks. Y'all been voting Democrat all these years. What have you gotten for us? And I said, okay, well, if you telling me Republican policy is so great for our people, I said, I need you to explain to me how Mississippi is the brokest state in America. I said, they didn't let nobody black statewide since 1890 when they had a constitutional convention because they were upset with the number of black people who got elected statewide. I said, ever since then, it hasn't happened. I said, if you tell me your policies are so great, I need to understand why Arkansas is so broke, Louisiana is so broke, South Carolina is so broke, Tennessee is so broke. I said, I can read you the list. I said, don't sound like it's going great to me. And then we got to the issue of housing, and then I brought up home appraisals. He was like, well, you can't tell me anecdotally that this is an impact. I said, no, I can't tell you. That was just simply a study done, 47 million homes that was studied. I said where more than $100 billion has been kept from black folks due to home appraisals, where white adjusters said, oh, no, the home is not worth $300,000, it's worth $200,000. And he's like, well, I don't believe that stuff exists. And I said, fine, let's pull it up. We are living in a world where folk are in denial about how the past is still impacting the present. We are sitting here, and I'm always amazed when I talk to my friends and we start talking about public policy, we start talking about the history of fascism and racism and discrimination, and I love it when people bring up Hitler and the Holocaust, and I have to remind them that Hitler sent his emissaries to the United States to study American Jim Crow to get some pointers to bring it back to Germany in order to discriminate against folk there. Ain't that amazing? We criticize Hitler for killing 6 million Jews, but he studied America Jim Crow to understand how to do it. That's called American history. Here we are in this year celebrating the 250th anniversary, and we've got somebody sitting in the White House who we know can't read, who wants to redefine history, who wants to rewrite history, who is attacking the Smithsonian, who does not want them to tell the real story. They want to tell this fake story because there are folk here who somehow just cannot accept the reality of how we got to this place. I can say on one hand how America has treated us, and on the other hand say how patriotic we are. Two things can be true at the same time. Jackie Robinson said it, but he also said he wouldn't stand for the flag. Paul Robeson said it, but he also said he loves his country. And so you've always had those things happen in our society. But what has to happen now is we've got to have some people of courage. Black folks, white folks, Asian, Native American, does not matter. Latino doesn't matter. We need folks of courage today. Not folk who are going to play the go-along, get-along game. We need people who are going to be willing to challenge power and say, no, this is not the country that we want to actually have. Right now, I love the folk who I'm playing golf. One guy said, he said, I don't like all the stuff that Trump says and does, but I'm voting for policies. I said, say, bro, you voting for both things. And here we are right now, just this week. The Texas Observer reported that an ICE attorney in Texas, who they discovered had a secret Twitter account that was that put out white supremacist language, was brought back into the office. Paul Ingracia, they pulled the nomination for a job. They now moved him to the GSA. He said in a chat group that he has a Nazi streak. See, I need folk to understand that right now in the United States, we literally have a federal government, an administration that willingly allows folk who admit to being Nazis to still have a job. Right now. That's a fact. And as a result, you are seeing what happens when those kind of folk are in charge. Just the other day, there was a congressional hearing, and Congressman Jared Moskowitz had to go off because of the way things work in Congress. Congresswoman Beatty knows this here. They have reserved seating in hearing rooms. Where the Democrats say, these are our guests. The Republicans say, these are our guests. The Republicans had a guest, the leader of the Oath Keepers, that racist group, a person who was convicted of seditious conspiracy. Now, it's amazing to me the folk who wrap themselves in the flag, say they love America, openly embrace somebody who was convicted of seditious conspiracy. Then one of the Proud Boys who was sent to prison, who Trump pardoned, just announced that he has now joined ICE. So what you're saying is that you have Oath Keepers and Proud Boys who are now being celebrated and actually hired and uplifted in the federal government. What does that tell you about the policies they are going to enact? We are seeing right now what actually has happened all across this country. I've been talking about how they are trying to defund Black America. They're attacking every single institution in Black America, academic, business, political. You've got a Supreme Court that's going to make a decision that could wipe out 1/3 of the Congressional Black Caucus, that could wipe out state legislators and county commissioners and city council members and school board members all across the South in the Louisiana versus Cali decision. We know exactly how they likely are going to rule. That is happening in 2026. We see folks who are trying to condense the voting rolls, how they are now demanding states turn their voter rolls over because they're going to try their best to see how they can wipe folks off the voting rolls. And here we are still celebrating, Dr. King Day and Black History Month, and the stuff that folks fought for, they're fighting. You got a person sitting in the White House who just gave an interview with the New York Times who said that the 1946 Civil Rights Act was not good because it hurt a whole lot of white folks. Do people really understand what America looked like prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act? If you were black, you couldn't do public transportation, go into hotels. It was about public accommodations. We can go on and on and on. This same Supreme Court, with that Cali decision, is attacking the 1965 Voting Rights Act. These same folks are attacking the 1968 Fair Housing Act. So what you have to understand is there are folks on the right who fundamentally believe that the destruction of America began as a result of those 3 Civil Rights Acts. But see, this ain't the first time we've been here. See, you can't be at an education association dinner and don't understand American history. Because if you go back to the 1800s, after the Civil War, you had those 3 Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, oh my God. Are they not trying to change the citizenship? That's the 14th Amendment. They are using a 13th Amendment, the 15th against us as well. And then so those radical Republicans of the 1800s ain't the same radical Republicans in the 21st century. Trust me, it might have Republican in their name, but they're not the same. There is no Thaddeus Stevens today on the Republican side. And so if you understand the period of Reconstruction, of that 12-year period, then you have the course the election of 1876, leading to the Great Compromise of 1877, where they pulled the federal troops out of the last 3 southern capitals, and then Jim Crow came back in. For the next 92 years, you had, frankly, slavery without shackles. You had the overturning of the 1875 Civil Rights Act. You had Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. I need you to understand that what we are going through now is the exact same thing they went through then. Congresswoman Beatty brings up Congressman Clyburn's book, talk about those 8 members of Congress. Understand when that happened, that last one from North Carolina, Congressman White stood up there and gave a speech on the floor saying, we will rise like Phoenix, because he understood the attack. What I need you to understand, if you don't read history and understand how history went, you cannot understand what the plan today is to fight back. And the plan today to fight back means you got to have a generation of people who are not scared. You got to have a generation of people who are not sleeping. You got to have a generation of people who are not so fixated with partying and going to brunches and giving themselves awards and then not actually doing the work. And what it also requires, not just black folks doing the work, but it requires white folks doing the work too. So for every Viola Liuzzo and James Reed, you got to have folk doing the exact same thing today. And let me also put a pin in this right now. If you're a white woman in this room, let me be real clear. Ain't nobody benefited more than white women from affirmative action in the United States. The reality is, y'all, if you think I'm lying, all you got to understand is the history. Because understand there was a racist congressman in Virginia named Judge Smith who put women into the 1964 Civil Rights Act because he thought it was going to kill it. It actually got it more votes. Okay, some of y'all look at me like, well, I don't know about that. Okay, fine. What is Title IX? Title IX ain't about sports. When Senator Ted Kennedy got it passed, no, that was about opening the professional schools up to women. So you just look at the numbers. The number of women who became lawyers and doctors and dentists and engineers and architects blew up after Title IX in 1972. Now ask yourself the question, what is Title IX? Where does Title IX come from? Boom, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So the law that black folks bled for and died for has actually benefited women, largely white women, in a huge way. If you think I'm lying, look at the federal contracts. $37 billion of DBE contracts go to women and minorities. White women get 78% of the $37 billion. Now, why am I singling out white women? Because I need white women to stop being so damn silent with the attacks going on right now, because when they attack us, they're attacking you. I need white men who are the husbands and the sons of those same white women to stand up and realize that you cutting your own nose off as well, because trust me, when they get done with us, they don't like women either. Speaker Mike Johnson don't want women to vote. They don't want women in business. You need to understand, it's right there in Project 2025. They literally want white women to stay at the house, have sex, kick out some babies, go cook, and be quiet. It's literally right there in their own agenda. What I'm trying to say is, we in this boat together. So we cannot sit here in 2026 and just be satisfied and happy with what is going on. We can't just say, well, you know, I don't know, there's nothing that we can actually do. See, when we say I'm tired, and I'm going to let somebody else do it, well, then the question then becomes, well, who's the somebody else? Exactly who is it? Who are the folks who are going to be willing to stand up? You got folks in this country. Trump is dying to invoke the Insurrection Act. He wants to send federal troops on the streets of this country to quell protests. And what I don't understand is, how can folk praise the military and praise our soldiers, talk about what they fought for, when these same folk love the Second Amendment but skip the First? If you do not have a first, you will not have a second. And there's no greater way to express being American than the freedom of protest, than the freedom to assemble, than the freedom to tell the government, you must address our issues. And so what should be happening right now, if folk truly say that they respect Dr. King, don't recite quotes back to me. Don't recite a speech back to me. I need to hear, how are you going to do the work that he was actually involved with? See, I appreciate the plan of that sermon earlier. But do me a favor, don't play that part again. Because for too many of us, we keep playing the mountaintop part of the sermon. We always play the last 2 minutes of that April 3rd, 1968 Mason Temple sermon. But that was a 43-minute and 16-second sermon. And in that same sermon, he talked about redistributing the pain. In the same sermon, he name-checked companies we should boycott economically. In the same sermon, he said we don't have to throw a Molotov cocktail. He said we can practice economic withdrawal to bring this country to its knees. In the same sermon, he talked about collective action. In the same sermon, he said black folks individually are poor, yet collectively represent one of the largest economies in the world. He said you must move as a collective to be able to change the direction of this country. So do me a favor. Don't just play the mountaintop part and skip over the boycott part. Don't play the mountaintop part, because see, the mountaintop part is the end of it. The earlier stuff is the actual work that he laid out. And that really what should be happening. And see, what really should be happening with this dinner is that when you come back next year, you should come back to this dinner and serve as an annual report. What did we accomplish in the previous 364 days? Next year, you must ask the question of every political leader sitting at a table, are our schools still being screwed by your tax abatements? When you come back next year, you should be saying, what did we do to challenge the legislature when it came to voting rights and civil rights and economic rights and helping the poor in our community. When you come back next year, you should be saying, how did we challenge City Hall when it comes to making sure a police department is not shooting and killing folks unnecessarily and holding cops accountable? If you come back next year, you should be saying to major corporations in Columbus, what have you accomplished? And so you ain't got to call it DEI, but you still gonna make sure that you are doing something with the folk who are investing in your companies. See, if you come back here just to show up, get dressed up for a photo, and then there's no discussion about what has changed, then all of a sudden we can't celebrate King. Because his whole life and the life of those involved were about how do we change America? How do we change states? How do we change cities? How do we redefine? How do we redistribute resources as opposed to the rich getting richer and the poor getting poor? That really is what he